Hey everyone, glad to have you with us. Today we're really diving deep into something I know a lot of you are thinking about. It's leadership in the digital age, right? Specifically, we're digging into this fascinating report, the 2018 Global Leadership Forecast.
Yeah.
And this isn't just some, quick survey they put together.
Right.
This is a massive study. DDI, the Conference Board, and EY, these guys went all out. They got insights from more than 25,000 leaders and like 2,500 HR professionals across 54 countries. So
It's global.
for the global perspective.
It really is one of the most comprehensive reports out there, looking at all these leadership trends that are like shaping the way we work.
Absolutely. And it dives right in, which I love. Like right off the bat, it's like, boom, CEOs are more worried about developing future leaders, getting that next generation ready and holding on to their top talent than they are about a global recession.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
It's a big deal. And, the study even calls it a leadership crisis, which I think is really interesting. But here's the thing, right?
Okay.
Even though everyone is freaking out about this leadership gap, right?
Yeah.
Only 41%, less than half, of leaders actually think the leadership development programs their companies have are any good.
Right. It's like saying, okay, the house is on fire,
Right.
let's put it out, but we're only going to use these buckets with holes in them.
Exactly. It just doesn't make sense. And I think, honestly, a big part of the problem is a lot of companies just don't have a clear strategy for leadership. You wouldn't, run a business without a plan, right?
Right.
So why would you approach something as important as leadership development without one?
That's such a good point.
The companies that are doing it right, the ones that have this solid leadership strategy that connects with their goals, includes actual steps for development. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They end up with better leaders, higher quality, and they've got this pipeline of future leaders ready to go.
So it's about being proactive.
Yes.
Not just reacting when the problem's already here.
Exactly. And here's the thing, and this was really interesting to me, this strategic leadership thing. It's not just some feel-good leadership theory.
Right.
It's directly connected to, better finances for the company.
So it's good for business.
Yes, very much so. And I think that's something that, a lot of leaders need to hear because it makes it real for them.
Absolutely. But I'm curious, what does this strategic leadership, what does it actually look like when a company's doing it right?
So they actually break it down in the report. It starts with figuring out exactly what skills their leaders need to be successful, right? What does good leadership actually look like in their company?
Mm-hmm.
And then they've got to figure out, okay, do our current and potential leaders, do they actually have these skills? And can they, anticipate what they'll need in the future based on where they're going as a company?
So it's like getting organized, but it's also about being future focused?
Yeah, exactly. And there's this whole other part of it that I found really fascinating. It's what they call purpose-driven leadership.
Okay, so what's that all about?
So you know how lots of companies have that mission statement?
Right.
Often framed or gathering dust somewhere.
Yeah.
The study found that it's not enough to just have it, Leaders actually need to live it. They need to believe in the company's purpose and show it.
So it's less about talking the talk and more about walking the walk.
100%, yeah. And when they do that, when leaders genuinely embody the company's purpose, the results are pretty incredible.
Like what kind of incredible are we talking about?
We're talking outperforming the market by 42%. And this isn't just a happy coincidence they found. This is a statistically significant finding from their research.
42%. Okay, now you've got my attention.
Right. And it makes sense if you think about it. When people see their leaders actually walking the walk, believing in what the company stands for, it just creates a whole different vibe, more authentic.
Yeah, that authenticity. People can spot a fake from a mile away.
Exactly.
But look, we're here to talk about leadership in the digital age, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface. So how does all of this, how does it connect to technology?
Yeah, that's the big question. And it's not as simple as just being good with technology, right?
Yeah.
Knowing how to use the latest gadgets. It's much bigger than that.
Right.
The study calls it leading with digitization.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. What does that actually mean, leading with digitization?
It means, first of all, really understanding how technology is going to transform, completely revolutionize your business, your whole industry.
Mm-hmm.
And it also means knowing how to adapt to all the constant changes and preparing your team for that kind of world.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
How well are leaders doing on the leading with digitization front?
That's the thing, right? While a lot of leaders are super confident about their more traditional leadership skills, like, communication and all that. They're way less confident when it comes to digital leadership.
Interesting. So they know tech is important, but they don't necessarily feel equipped to lead in that space.
That's the gap.
Right.
They see it, but they don't necessarily know how to bridge it.
So how do they bridge that gap? What are the specific skills that leaders really need to be focusing on?
So one thing the report highlights is this whole idea of being able to see where things are going, anticipating how those big digital trends are going to impact their businesses. And not just, tomorrow, but way down the line.
For digital crystal ball gazing.
Kind of, yeah. It's about picking up on those early signals, seeing the potential impact.
Right.
But, and this is key, it's not enough to just predict the future.
Right.
You got to be able to act on those predictions.
Make decisions quickly.
Yes. Because, and I think we all know this, the digital world changes so fast. What's relevant today might be obsolete tomorrow.
It's all about being adaptable.
100%. Another thing that's super important, especially in a digital world where everything's connected, is collaboration.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Breaking down those silos, getting people to work together, it's essential.
And that requires a different set of leadership skills, right? Than managing a team that's all in the same office.
For sure. Leading virtual teams, working across time zones and cultures, it's different.
Yeah.
You have to be intentional about building trust remotely and making sure everyone feels connected to the same goal, even when they're miles apart.
Absolutely. And of course, we can't forget about data. It's the foundation of this whole digital age, right?
It's everything.
Yeah.
But it's not enough to just collect mountains of data. You have to actually know what to do with it. Leaders need to be able to use data to make smart decisions.
So it's about being data translators, turning raw data into something meaningful that people can actually use.
Exactly. They need to be able to spot the patterns, see the stories in the numbers.
And then communicate those insights, right?
Exactly, to drive real change within their organizations.
I'm with you. But there was this really interesting thing in the report about data. It said that the best data-driven leaders weren't just good with the numbers.
This is what I love about the study. You'd think it would be all about the tech skills, right?
Right.
But they actually found that the leaders who were the best with data, they were also incredibly empathetic. And they were really collaborative.
Wait, so you're saying empathy and collaboration, those things matter even more in a world that's all about data and algorithms?
More than ever. Because at the end of the day, data is about people, right? It's about figuring out what people need, what makes them tick, how they behave. And the best leaders, they know how to connect the dots. They can take the data and connect it to those really human insights.
Okay, that is super fascinating. So we've got this digital landscape. It's changing all the time. And it demands that leaders be adaptable. They've got to be comfy with data and fluent in all things digital. But at the same time, we've got this generational shift happening in the workplace. So how do millennials, the ones who are supposed to be the digital natives, they grew up with all of this. How do they fit into all of this?
Right. You'd think they'd be naturals at leading in the digital world, that it would just come easy to them.
Right.
But here's the thing. While they're totally comfortable with technology itself, they aren't necessarily leading with it.
Exactly.
It's not enough to just, grow up with smartphones and social media. There's more to it when it comes to actually leading in this digital world, even for people who feel like tech is second nature.
Yeah, I think that's a really important takeaway from this. It's a wake-up call for companies to say, hey, we can't just assume people know how to lead with technology, even if they're good at using it.
Yeah.
We've got to provide the right kind of support and development.
So what does that look like? How do we help millennials who are going to be leading the charge pretty soon? How do we help them really step up and become those digital leaders? So I think it comes down to giving them real opportunities to lead in a digital context. And what I mean by that is it's not just about more tech training, right? It's about giving them projects, real projects, where they have to use technology to solve actual business problems.
Okay.
Or, maybe pairing them up with a mentor who's killing it in the digital space already.
Someone who's been there, done that.
Exactly. So they can see it in action,
Learn from the best.
Exactly. Because I think, especially with something like digital leadership, where things are changing so fast, experience is the best teacher.
100%. And speaking of experience, the report had some really interesting things to say about Gen Xers.
Yeah.
They're the ones who kind of got caught between the analog and digital worlds.
Right.
What I found really interesting is they actually might be in the best position to lead in this kind of environment, this digital world?
Uh-huh.
What do you think?
I think you might be onto something there. Because they've seen it all, right? They remember what it was like before, and they get what's happening now. It's like this unique perspective.
That historical context.
Exactly. And they also tend to be really, really good at getting things done. They're not afraid to roll up their sleeves, and they know how to execute, which is crucial in the digital world.
It's all about action.
Exactly. Plus, and this is something I really admire about Gen X leaders, they're really invested in developing their teams. Like, the report actually found that they're the most likely generation to seek out coaching for themselves, to become better leaders.
Oh, wow. Is that so they can be better coaches for their own teams?
I think so. It shows that they're aware of their own strengths and weaknesses, and they're not afraid to ask for help when they need it, which I think is huge.
Vulnerability is so important in leadership, I think.
Totally.
It builds trust. But, it's not just about generations, right? The study also looked at, the role of women in leadership, what they find there.
This is another area where the data is super clear. Companies with more women in leadership positions, they're not just doing the right thing, they're also seeing better results overall.
Okay, so it's not just about, checking boxes. It's good for business.
Absolutely. And it makes sense when you think about all the research that's out there about how diverse perspectives lead to better decision-making and ultimately better outcomes for everyone.
Makes sense. I am curious, though, what are companies that are doing a good job of, fostering women leaders? What are they doing differently?
So a couple things stood out. They're often the ones with really strong mentoring programs, which makes a lot of sense.
Right, because that support is so crucial.
Yeah, and they're also using data, They're tracking things like how many women are in leadership positions, making sure that their hiring and promotion processes are actually fair.
Okay, so transparency is key.
Absolutely. It's about being accountable and making sure everyone has an equal shot. But it's not just about programs and policies, right? It's about creating a culture where women feel truly supported and empowered to lead.
That often starts at the top, right?
100%. It's got to be a top-down approach. When leaders, especially those at the very top, when they champion diversity and inclusion, it sets the tone for the whole company. And that's when you start to see real change happening.
It becomes part of the DNA of the company.
Exactly. So we've talked about strategy, right? We've talked about purpose. We've dug into the digital divide, the generation gap, and the importance of diversity. But how do we actually give people, all these leaders, how do we equip them to deal with all of this? How do we help them thrive in this environment? So the study found that one of the absolute best ways is through coaching. And I'm not just talking about your manager telling you what to do. I'm talking about coaching from all sides, your peers, mentors, even the people you manage.
So it's about creating an environment where everyone's learning from each other all the time.
Yes. Exactly. And giving each other feedback. Because when you have that kind of culture, a coaching culture, it makes everyone more engaged, more accountable.
People feel more invested.
Exactly. And you end up with a much stronger group of leaders overall because everyone has a chance to learn and grow.
It's about that shared knowledge, right? Because we all have something to teach each other. But what about more traditional mentoring? Is that still a thing in this fast-paced, always-on digital world?
It's funny you asked that. The study actually found that almost 60% of leaders said they've never had a formal mentor.
Seriously? But that seems so valuable.
I know, right? Especially for people who are just starting out in their leadership journeys. I think it's a missed opportunity for a lot of organizations.
Maybe they just don't realize how important it can be.
I think that's a big part of it. But when companies actually invest in formal mentoring programs, they tend to see really positive results.
Like what?
Less turnover, for one. They're better at keeping their good people. And the quality of their leaders is higher because they've had that guidance.
Makes sense. Okay, so we're bringing back mentoring programs. But what about the actual learning process? Are we talking about boring classrooms and outdated training materials? Because those don't exactly scream digital age, do they?
I hear you on that. But the good news is leadership development is changing. People are starting to realize that, especially in the digital world, people want learning that's more personalized, more on demand.
They want to learn what they need when they need it.
Exactly. So instead of those old school training programs, we're seeing things like mobile learning, where you can take a quick course on your phone, micro learning, which is just bite-sized chunks of information.
I love that.
And even game-based learning, which makes it more fun and engaging.
That's awesome. It makes learning more accessible, too. You don't have to block off a whole week for a training session. You can learn on your own time, at your own pace.
That's the beauty of it. But here's the thing. with all this talk about leadership development and all these new approaches, we have to talk about HR because at the end of the day, they're the ones, in charge of finding, training, keeping all the talent.
Right. The guy like the talent architects.
Totally. And they're feeling the pressure to adapt
Right.
to this crazy, fast-changing work world. But the study actually found that HR is, well, they're kind of lagging behind in some key areas.
Really? Where are they falling short? What's the disconnect?
So while HR totally gets that digital fluency and data-driven decision-making are important, they hadn't necessarily mastered those things themselves.
So they're telling everyone else to do it.
But they haven't always fully embraced it in their own work, yeah. Which is a huge opportunity, I think, because they're sitting on this gold mine of data.
But they need to know how to use it.
Exactly. If they can get really good at using data, like really good, HR can completely transform how companies find, develop, and keep their best people.
Yeah, HR really has this amazing opportunity to shape the future of leadership, don't they? But it does seem like they have a little bit of catching up to do.
Right, but let's not forget about our listeners, right? The people who are tuned in because they want to be better leaders, especially in this digital age. So what are the key takeaways for them? What can they actually do with all this information?
That is the million-dollar question because we've covered so much. It's almost overwhelming. Where does someone even begin?
You're right. It is a lot to take in, but remember we talked about those 6 leadership megatrends earlier? They're a really good place to start a kind of roadmap for navigating this new world of work.
Right. Those mega trends would be helpful to revisit.
Okay, so the first one was all about the speed of digital transformation, basically. If companies and leaders aren't embracing it, they're already falling behind.
And the second mega trend that was about data, right? Not just collecting it, but actually using it to make a difference.
Exactly. And one of the most powerful ways to use data is to create a more inclusive and fair workplace. Use it to track progress on diversity goals, make sure that hiring and promotion decisions are actually fair.
That makes a ton of sense. What was number 3 again?
Number 3 was all about company culture. Having the right culture is absolutely essential if you want to attract and keep great people and if you want to encourage innovation.
So what does a successful company culture look like in the digital age?
It's about having a really strong sense of purpose and encouraging people to coach and mentor each other. It's also about being okay with experimentation and not punishing people for taking risks, and of course, valuing diversity.
It sounds like culture is even more important to this digital world, not less.
100%. You can have the best leadership strategies in the world and all the latest technology, but if you don't have the right culture, none of it will matter.
Culture is the foundation that everything else is built on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so megatrend number 4. That one challenged the whole idea of the lone wolf leader, the one who's supposed to have all the answers.
Right? That old school image of the CEO who knows everything.
It just doesn't work like that anymore, especially in a world that's as complex and fast-changing as ours. Leaders need to be open to coaching and mentoring, and they need to be willing to share leadership.
It's about recognizing that we're smarter together.
100%. And that brings us to megatrend number 5, which is all about finding leaders in unexpected places. Companies need to look beyond the usual suspects and tap into the potential of people at every level of the organization.
So it's about democratizing leadership a little bit.
Exactly. Give everyone a chance to step up and lead regardless of their job title. And last but not least, megatrend number 6 is a bit of a call to action for HR.
I'm ready. What do they need to do?
Well, the study found that HR professionals, they get the whole data thing, and they understand how important digital fluency is, but they haven't always fully embraced those things in their own work.
They need to practice what they preach.
Exactly. They need to become more data-driven themselves and really level up their digital skills so they can be true strategic partners to the business.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we're almost out of time, but I have one last question. What's the one thing our listeners can do today to become better leaders in this digital world?
That's a great question. And honestly, there's no magic bullet, but I think it all starts with self-awareness and a willingness to keep learning.
Can you say more about that? What does that look like in practice?
Start by asking yourself some tough questions, like what are my strengths as a leader? What are my weaknesses? What are my values? And how do they line up with my company's mission? What kind of impact do I really want to have?
Those are great questions to think about.
And it's not just about finding the right answers. It's about being open to feedback from others and always being willing to learn and grow.
So it's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And that's especially true in the digital age because things are constantly changing. The best leaders are the ones who are curious, adaptable, and always ready to learn something new.
I love that. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the global leadership forecast. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insights. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure as well. Thanks for having me.
We hope you've all found this conversation helpful and inspiring, and we wish you the best of luck on your own leadership journeys. Until next time.